Well, welcome back, everyone, for night 4 journey through mindfulness in America. Um, and we're so glad to have you all participating in this 2016 summer session. Um, I'm Dexter Marr, and I'll be your host again tonight. Um, and just want to say, again, thank you to all those that are bringing refreshments, because the buffet line is becoming more and more awesome. So please, everybody partake and enjoy the refreshments and that we have. And again, thanks to all of our volunteers and staff who are making all this possible and streaming this live. It's Thursday night in Honolulu, from the Buddha Study Center. So hello everybody in internet land. And so I think we have maybe just one or two new folks here, so I just want to do the reminders that our bathrooms are this way, and then food and refreshments are available throughout the presentations, so feel free to stretch your legs whenever you need. Put your cell phones on silent mode. We are YouTube streaming, so when we do questions, please kind of wait for the microphone so that we can pick it up for everybody to hear. Reminder again, tonight we have our photo, our summer session photo, and that'll be at about 7:30, and so we'll be breaking at about 7:15, 7:20-ish. Kind of depends on when our photographer gets here, and then we'll be gathering on that far side wall and have a photo, and then a regular break after that. Okay? And then we'll be going back to lecture and questions and answers after that. We do have note cards for you, so if you would like to write your questions out for Professor Wilson, that's available to you, or using the microphone is fine. So our topic tonight is making America mindful, and it's probably and since we're going to be looking at kind of the side of mindfulness of how it might make our society a little bit better. Today is quite appropriate since we've had another tragedy in France. If you haven't been, looking at the news, there was another terrorist attack at the Bastille Day celebrations in Nice, France, and so the world continues to boil and bubble, and in anger and violence, and so we can certainly all use the things that we know that are available through us from our Buddhist backgrounds in mindfulness and trying to be better human beings. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Okay, all right, that should be picking me up, seems to be. Sorry about that, it pulled off when I stood up, so just had to fix it there. Thank you for the introduction, Dexter, and thank you to everyone for returning for another round of punishment. Here we are, Thursday, it's round 4, so you guys have a lot of stamina, I appreciate that. And to anyone who is here for the first time, thank you very much and welcome. So, yeah, I noticed also that the food seems to be multiplying. That's wonderful. So great opportunities to do mindful eating like we suggested yesterday. And show of hands, how many people did their mindful sex homework also last night? No. Don't show, no? Okay. There's always one. Okay, thank you. I wonder, Dexter, could we just turn off that bank of lights right there? It'll just help to show the slides just a little bit better. My apologies to those in YouTube land, but there we go. So that shows a little better, particularly in this very interesting piece of artwork, which is sort of pointing towards what I want to talk about tonight. We've talked so far on the first 3 nights about where Buddhist mindfulness sort of comes from, how it's gotten to America, and then how Americans have changed the way they present and understand and use it so that it could be taken up by the mainstream. And we've demonstrated that it has very much so been taken up by the mainstream in various ways. And then there have been a number of questions about how this mindfulness movement in general, or how specific mindful types of activities might help do those activities better, might actually help improve some of the problems that people see in society. So those were really excellent questions that I continually dodged throughout the last few days and prepared instead our lecture for tonight to discuss these sort of things. Because while there's certainly people in the overall mindfulness movement who are only doing it just sort of for their own personal gain, whether it's for their own personal weight loss or for their own personal enhancement of their relationship or their sexual activity, or to make money in the stock market and this sort of thing. Those absolutely, those uses do exist. The truth of the matter is that quite a significant number of people who are involved in mindfulness in America do so with the feeling that this mindfulness has something to offer, not simply themselves as self-centered individuals, but also has something to offer all of us as a society potentially, and that through the power of mindfulness, American society might be improved. Certainly this aspect or that aspect might be improved, or maybe even the entire society might be improved. In fact, I even go so far as, some people say we'll save the world through mindfulness in some fashion. So I want to look at this phenomenon of sort of moral or social concern on the part of people in the mindfulness movement, whether they're on the more Buddhist side of it or the more secular side of it. The truth of the matter is that a lot of people are talking and thinking about how mindfulness might be of benefit on a larger social scale. So that's what we're going to look at. Attempts to make America mindful, whereas so far we've talked about how America has changed mindfulness. Maybe mindfulness can change the United States as well. That's our topic for tonight. So as you might imagine, there's some sense that the United States is currently basically it's samsara. It's a round of suffering and difficulty and stress. We've seen a few clues that people feel that way, for example, in how they discussed the state of people around eating and so on. We're going to get into this tonight. So, can mindfulness save America? Certainly a lot of people seem to think that America could use some saving. Actually, that's probably what both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump supporters can all agree on, right? They all want to make America great again. They just disagree about how to go about doing so. In some ways, this kind of fits with what I was talking about last couple days, especially yesterday, about the idea of mindfulness delivering practical benefits. What benefit could be more practical and more this worldly than improving the society in which you live in, right? This is not an otherworldly or transcendent sort of desire. It's a practical, this worldly sort of desire, but it's one that all could share in rather than just one person at a time, potentially. So, what do people in the mindfulness movement who have these sort of larger social concerns, what do they say about the state of America right now? If they're concerned to make America mindful and to save it, obviously they must think there's some problem here. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a need to offer this solution. Well, the critiques that we see are that the United States is a culture nowadays, or a society, in which we are all very disconnected. We are not, we don't know our neighbors, and we aren't near our family anymore, and we're just sort of cut off from each other. We're busy always looking at our iPhone rather than talking to the person next to us in this way, right? So a sense of being very disconnected, being very distracted, because there's all these sort sort of demands are on our time, or pulls on our attention, many of them electronic in nature, but not only that. And that generally speaking, we are stressed out as a society. This is suggested time and again in the mindfulness literature that I've examined. We are stressed out, they say. So here's our comic here to aid us here. The basic attitude, you are here, but your mind is somewhere else. So you're always here, but you're pulled away into the internet or into worry, anxiety, or replaying problems, or busy yelling at your kids who are at school right now. But you're stuck in that loop because they didn't brush their teeth in the morning or something like this. So we're not actually here, not actually living life as it's actually going on, and this is a serious problem. So we'll look at a few of our authors that we've already encountered. We have Jon Kabat-Zinn. This is the creator of mindfulness-based stress reduction, which we talked somewhat about last night, I believe it was, and or maybe it was the previous night, actually. It was Tuesday. And he trained, of course, in Buddhist mindfulness practices, and then in a very savvy way, he was able to bring them instead into a medical environment. And now he is just a big-time mindfulness figure. He's always giving interviews in the media, publishes a lot of books, a lot of articles, and he's not just pushing mindfulness as a way to lower your stress, but he has a larger social concern that he believes could be addressed by mindfulness. Here's what he says about our society. We're out of touch. Always this sense that we're out of touch. We're out of touch with our feelings and perceptions, impulses and our emotions, with our thoughts, what we're saying, and even with our bodies. So these are, of course, all the things you're supposed to be mindful of. These are the first of those four foundations of mindfulness, right? We're out of touch. This is mostly due to being perpetually preoccupied, lost in our minds, absorbed in our thoughts, obsessed with the past or the future, consumed with our plans and our desires, diverted by our need to be entertained. Yeah, I'm sorry, he does kind of go on here, doesn't he? Driven by our fears, expectations, and so on, right? So he's not even talking so much about the fact that we all are like glued to our tablets or smartphones or whatever. He just thinks that in general we're walking around with all this kind of turmoil going on in our minds. And it's only become worse with the advent of sort of the universal digital revolution that came along since he actually wrote these words. Therefore, we're amazingly out of touch in some way or other with the present moment. The moment that is actually presenting itself to us now. So we're never living in the present moment, and that's a very serious problem. According to Jon Kabat-Zinn, and I would say this is a sentiment that basically everyone in the mindfulness movement, no matter what type of tradition they're in or how they see themselves as a participant or whatever, I think they would pretty much all affirm the basic attitude that's expressed here, that this is how we are today. This is Jon Kabat-Zinn again, just furthering that analysis. Sorry, we have a good bit of text here, the first few slides, but it won't all be like that. So he's saying it's now harder to pay attention to any one thing, and there's more to pay attention to. We're easily diverted, more easily distracted. So he's actually suggesting not just that we walk around with a tumultuous mind, but that our ability to pay attention has degraded over time. It has devolved. So we used to be more able to be patient or more able to be attentive, but today we are less able to be attentive than we were even ourselves at earlier stages in our life. That regardless of how old we are, we've all lost a lot of this capacity. Why is this? Well, for one reason, we're continuously bombarded with information, appeals, deadlines, communications. Things come at us fast and furious, relentlessly. And almost all of it's man-made. It has thought behind it, more often than not, an appeal to either our greed or our fears. So here he's really actually talking about the way in which our lifestyle has, in fact, actually changed. That we're all carrying a phone around in our pocket or in our purse at this point. And so it's always available to us. It's constantly sending us emails or tweeting at us or sending text messages and basically calling out for attention. I mean, the phone is always chirping or buzzing or ringing and wanting us to look at it because many people all around the world are trying to get our attention. And often we are having advertising that's being delivered to us, wanted or not, through these devices that we're always carrying around. And even if we turn the thing off, often we're at work and our work is increasingly tied to computer screens in a way that a generation ago it certainly wasn't, right? But now it's very hard for most of us to escape having to spend significant time with a computer screen in our work, whatever that may be. This is especially true since we have shifted largely from a manufacturing to a service and information economy, right? So we're always having to be exposed to information coming in, trying to manage it all the time. So this has degraded our ability to pay attention to any one thing. We now celebrate multitaskers, right? A multitasker is like a hero now. You're judged by your ability to do several things simultaneously. And if you can juggle all these things, you're seen to be more competent and therefore a better worker, a better person, or maybe a better parent. There's a lot of pop cultural psychology suggesting that women are more inherent multitaskers than men, and that this is a good thing, and that this means they can be a mother and be a worker and do all these things at the same time. Some people think that's supposed to be empowering, but at least my observation is it tends to just put even higher expectations on working mothers, so I'm not sure it's actually that great a stereotype. So this idea of multitasking has been validated, but it's that very multitasking, according to these mindfulness authors, which is part of the problem. When we're trying to do all these many things at once, we're barely aware of what we're doing. We're doing most of them poorly because we're not giving our attention to these things, and they're affecting our health, and they're degrading our ability to ever pay attention to any one thing. So that even when the phone goes off and we're away from the computer and the television is turned off and everything, our minds have become so used to like a quick turnover cycle of attention that we have trouble just being still and just being with whatever single thing is now going on. Yeah. So what else does he say? These assaults on our nervous system continually stimulate and foster desire and agitation rather than contentedness and calmness. They foster reaction rather than communication, discord rather than accord or concord, acquisitiveness rather than feeling whole and complete as we are. Yeah, so the truth of the matter is that there are positive uses of this technology. You may be having a bad day and then someone sends you a message and it improves your feeling of mind, right? But he's suggesting that on the average, actually, these communications have sort of a deleterious effect on us, and that many of them are actually not intended for our welfare anyways, that they're often some sort of marketing that we're receiving in some way, and they just lower our ability to deal with things. So then we have our cartoon here. Crap, I gotta go, I can't find my cell phone anywhere, says the lady talking on the cell phone, right? So a pretty good example of mindlessness. I don't know if you've ever done this. This has actually happened. People have told me this has happened to them, so, or some close variation of that. All right, even more text. Still, it's important to look at what people are actually saying and kind of analyze it here. So we had Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's sort of, in a way, like the poster child of the secularized version of mindfulness. And we have Thich Nhat Hanh, who I've held up several times as sort of like the poster monk of the still overtly Buddhist side of the mindfulness movement. There's a lot more figures than just this, but it's good to just kind of rely on a few really good examples here. So what is he saying? We can see a relatively secular person like John Kabat-Zinn is moving in one way. What does a monk have to say about it? Well, it turns out Thich Nhat Hanh is, if anything, even more pessimistic about these things. He says we're like sleepwalkers, not knowing what we're doing or where we are headed. Sleepwalkers. So we are asleep. We are mindlessly moving through life. Also, we have to note that, of course, Buddhism is about awakening. So there is a type of Buddhist logic which is going on here, whether or not actual Buddhist terms are being overtly used. He says whether we can wake up or not depends on whether we can walk mindfully on our Mother Earth. So walking mindfully, which really he means being mindful as we go about our day. This is the key to whether we're going to be able to wake up or not. The future of all life, including our own, depends on our mindful steps. Okay, this is getting pretty dire, right? The future of all life depends on whether we can be mindful. Of course, the implication here is that if we are mindless, all of future life is maybe in danger. We have to hear the bells of mindfulness that are sounding across our planet. This is a particular way in which the Thich Nhat Hanh community uses mindfulness. They talk about, certainly you ring a bell at ritual times in order to bring your mind back to mindfulness, but they suggest that various sort of stimuli or sounds in the environment can be like bells of mindfulness, calling you back to be mindful. A famous example of this, actually, is your phone ring. So Thich Nhat Hanh, for decades, has taught that when the phone rings, hear it like a bell calling you to mindfulness. So it rings, bring, and then this actually stimulates you to not go, who's there? What is it? But you actually, you hear it, and then you pause. Maybe breathe in mindfully, breathe out mindfully. Prepare yourself for the conversation. So you just use it almost like a kitchen timer that wakes you up to, oh, I should be mindful now. And then you go and you answer the phone and have a mindful conversation with whoever called you in this way. So he's saying that there are bells of mindfulness sounding all across the planet. But here he doesn't mean cell phones are ringing all around the planet, although they are certainly doing that. What he means is we have to start learning how to live in a way so that a future will be possible for our children and grandchildren. So again, this is very dire, actually. A future may not be possible for our descendants if we do not get mindful. That's basically what he's saying here. If we continue to live as we've been living, consuming without a thought to the future, destroying our forests and emitting dangerous amounts of carbon dioxide, then devastating climate change is inevitable. Most of our ecosystem will be destroyed. Sea levels will rise, coastal cities will be inundated, hundreds of millions of refugees will leave their homes, there will be wars, infectious disease, etc. It will rain cats and dogs, and the earth will blow up. So it's going to be really bad for us if we are not mindful. All these dire consequences are being predicted. This is kind of strong language, right? But again, I think that a lot of people involved in the mindfulness movement would affirm this on some level, to some degree. So maybe not everybody thinks that we are potentially heading to actual, civilizational or, environmental destruction. But certainly many people would say we are damaging ourselves and damaging our world through mindless, greedy, acquisitive sort of behavior. And that mindfulness is sorely lacking. Otherwise, we probably would not act in these ways. So, what are the dangers that people are predicting may result from lack of mindfulness? Well, we've certainly seen that overeating is a danger that we face as members of this culture from our lack of mindfulness. Related to this in general is just the overconsumption, whether it's food or natural resources or whatever it may be, that we are constantly taking in and taking out of the environment. There is a limit to this. We don't know exactly what it is, but there logically must be a limit whereby we just flat out use everything up by our overconsumption. That's a serious problem. Not to mention that our overconsumptive behaviors are not just bad for the environment, they're actually bad for us. They have serious health and other effects on us, mindfulness authors suggest. Substance abuse, another danger of mindlessness. In the analysis that mindfulness authors present in America, substance abuse is essentially, among other things, an illness of mindlessness. Because rather than being willing to be mindfully with the present, including the sort of pain or trouble you may have in the present, you instead escape into mindlessness, into intoxication, into some sort of avoidance through the use of substances, which then themselves cloud your mind, addict you, and make it very hard for you to ever get back to some sort of mindfulness in this way. So substance abuse is seen as directly connected to mindlessness by authors in the mindfulness movement. Poor health, of course, results from the previous several sorts of things, not just from overeating, overconsuming, and substance abuse, but also being mindless. You're more accident prone, they say. That's certainly true. You know, if you're not paying attention, it's a lot easier to step off a curb at the wrong moment, right? Especially if you're, you know, glued to that cell phone, right? Pokemon Go just got released. I don't know if you guys are aware of this or not, but that's why every person under 30 that you've met in the last few days didn't give you eye contact, but instead was busy looking like this and shouting, I caught it, or whatever, right? You know, they're just all wandering around. I was over at the Honganji Betsuin this afternoon, and there was a whole crowd of teenagers at the temple there, and I don't mean out in front, I mean actually at the temple, all there, all, you know, battling each other and catching the Pokemon and everything on their cell phones. So, I don't know, I mean, I think maybe Betsuin might be like a gym or something, which is an actual training battle site in this game. So, yeah, if you're doing that, although you might be very mindful of your Pokemon, they don't actually exist. I hate to break it to people. You're looking at a screen, and meanwhile, you might be walking in traffic. So certainly poor health may result from this sort of thing, right? We got to watch out. Plus, mindlessness just results in stress. As we saw the last couple of days, people are really concerned about stress and about its direct deleterious health effects that it has, right? Other dangers of mindfulness, anger and fighting. So because you're not mindful of your emotions and mindful of the feelings of people around you, you're more likely to cause offense, you're more likely to take offense. If you take offense, you're more likely to react in some sort of negative way, rather than giving yourself a moment to think about it, or maybe calm down, or maybe consider whether maybe they're actually right, you know, and this sort of thing. But if you're always, you know, caught in a cycle of mindlessness and anxiety and anger, you're going to be reactive. You're going to cause problems to people around you. You're going to damage your relationships potentially in this way, right? So mindlessness is said to hurt relationships. Certainly some authors say that it's a chief cause of things like divorce or this sort of thing, that people break up because there's not enough mindfulness in their relationship, which would help them to run it better. Obviously, environmental damage, we just saw Thich Nhat Hanh talking about that. There's lots of general talk about this and some specific books about this as well. Stephanie Kazaa has a book called Mindfully Green, which is about sort of the environmental destruction we're facing, and suggests that mindfulness and other aspects of Buddhism might help us to deal with the eco-crisis that we face. And then on sort of the most ultimate level, maybe even up from environmental destruction, war and destruction and mass refugee crises and things like this. We just saw Thich Nhat Hanh talking about it. Other people suggest this sort of thing can happen as well, that if our leaders act in mindless, belligerent ways, we're more likely to have actual conflict between nations and so on. So pretty dire, a lot of dangers of mindfulness. And many mindfulness authors in America suggest that many of these are already occurring, and that even the worst of these are serious threats if we don't do something about it. So, of course, what do they think we should do about it? A shocker, I'm sure, to you after this long lead up of 3.5 days. They think mindfulness is the solution. We need to have a mindfulness revolution in America, which, most revolutions we think like people rising up, throwing rocks, maybe, shooting. I'm from New England, so a revolution, you think, the American Revolution and people running around in funny hats and shooting muskets at each other and this sort of thing, right? They don't mean that. A revolution of people who sit down and get quiet and follow their breath. And that's going to be the revolution that they think is maybe going to affect change for yourself and maybe potentially change on a much larger scale as well. A mindfulness revolution is needed. Some people are quite optimistic, in fact, that a mindfulness revolution is taking place right now. Certainly, Barry Boyce and the editors of Shambhala's Sun are big-time boosters for mindfulness practice, and they want to suggest that it can have all of the sort of positive effects I've talked about the last couple of days, but that it can also have larger social effects. This book they put out just a few years ago talks about how mindfulness is increasing so much in American society, and they're optimistic that it might be very helpful. They run several magazines, and one of them has a section called Mindful Society, so they're always running a column about how mindfulness is helping society in some larger way. So they really think that mindfulness is going to be the thing that turns around all these problems we've been facing. And that's because of the very deep faith that people have in the mindfulness movement. They have a very deep faith that the present moment has an almost miraculous healing power. And if we are able to stay with our minds, our attention, our awareness in the present moment, moment by moment, not just for a short meditation period, but hopefully in a more extended way, so that mindfulness is present frequently, if not constantly in our lives, there's a feeling that this present moment will be very healing and will help to reduce these many, many dangerous consequences that they've been suggesting we may encounter. So the basic theory here is, of course, that we're always only in the present. In fact, many mindfulness authors go a good bit further and say, there is only the present. There's no such thing as the past. There's no such thing as the future. There's only the present moment, and this present moment, and this present moment, and so on. Like, you're only always in the present moment. Despite what you may have seen on Star Trek, you can't actually go backwards to, it's not like there's an actual time tunnel, and this sort of thing. You can go back in a way, or you can go forward, to when Terminators rule the earth and this sort of thing, right? That these are not real, that we are just in the present moment. So everything else is, in a way, false if this is the only thing that's actually real. In fact, the past and the future are, in a way, myths. They're illusions of our minds. It's irrational to be caught in these things, suggest some authors. And the only sound, scientific, rational, and intelligent thing to do is to stay in the present moment, because it actually exists. Furthermore, many authors tend to suggest there's something wrong with the past and something wrong with the future. I don't want to overplay this, because it could sound like they hate the past or hate the future some way. That's not what I mean exactly. But there's something wrong about being in the past or the future compared to being in the present. The past is often depicted by people in the mindfulness literature as a source of problems. So if you're stuck in memory, you're not in the present moment, which is where you should be. And especially, it's frequently suggested that the sort of memories people get stuck on or walk around having tend to be negative ones. It's not like Jon Kabat-Zinn has no happy memories, he never thinks about, or Thich Nhat Hanh never, thinks back fondly on something he did back in the day. Of course not. They're not robots. They think about the good things that have happened, but they tend to suggest that we spend a lot of the time that we spend focused on the past, we spend it focused on bad things. So maybe it wouldn't be so bad if we spent a fair amount of our time thinking about how good things were and being grateful for them in some way. But actually, a lot of what we do, they want to suggest, is we obsess over all the problems that have happened to us. The things that went bad this morning over the breakfast table, and then the things that happened 25 years ago. You're still arguing with that person who you had the fight with, and they stormed out, and you didn't win the fight. And so 25 years later, you're still coming up with the very best rebuttal that you should have had, and the person's dead, or they don't remember what's going on. This is what they tend to suggest, that we get caught in these kind of loops in this way. And so the past is a problem, and it's better to just not live in the past, but to live in the present, because they continually tend to suggest we live in a bad past. If it were because we have this obsessive quality to our mind, we don't tend to focus and latch onto the good things and keep them in our mind. We tend to latch onto the bad things and keep going back. In fact, they suggest that for evolutionary reasons, this kind of makes sense, but nonetheless, it leads to stress and problems. Then they say that the future is also mainly a problem. So it's not as if they never plan anything. Jon Kabat-Zinn is booked as a speaker for the next 3 years, I promise you, right? He's already, he may have a secretary or he may do it himself. He's got, his plane tickets to go here and there, and he's already got his talk set up, and he's writing his notes for when he's going to have to be over in Asia at this thing, and he's preparing all this sort of stuff. It's not like he never plans or anything. He doesn't just say, oh, I think I'll give a talk today, and then go to the airport and buy a ticket and fly somewhere and then get off and go give a talk. No. So, like I say, it's possible to over-caricature what's going on here. But generally speaking, they think that living in the future is a serious problem because rather than being in the present moment, which is the only reality, we spend our time lost in thoughts and daydreams and planning for a future that isn't here, and so we should just let it come when it gets here. More to the point, they think often the way they depict what's going on with us is that we spend a lot of time worrying about the future. So we worry about things that are not actually going on. And we are anxious and upset about things that happened that are not actually going on. So somebody did me wrong 20 years ago. They really did. It was a real injustice. It was bad. And it happened 20 years ago. It's not going on right now. Be in the present moment. It's better off than if you're obsessing over that thing. Or you're concerned that, perhaps because the United Kingdom is allegedly leaving the European Union, that when that happens, it's going to cause stock prices to go down, and at that time you may be needing to call on your 401k, and so it may be an issue about when you wanted to take that trip to Las Vegas 5 years from now or anything. Well, okay, maybe that'll happen, but it's not going on right now. Calm down, come back to the present moment, be aware, in the present moment, everything is fine, okay, and just don't obsess in these ways. This is what they're talking about. So they feel that the present moment is healing because it isn't negative, the way they express the past and the future often being negative. And also, they tend to suggest that the present moment is not just not negative in those ways, but is actually somehow inherently positive in many cases. That in the present moment, you are in touch with yourself. You're in touch with your living. You're in touch with the earth. You're in touch with the people around you. You're in touch with the things that contribute to your life. As you eat mindfully, as you're present there with the food, you come to understand the food and perhaps appreciate the food. As you are with your spouse and you're mindful with them, you're actually there with them and you're not just ignoring them because you've been staring at them over the breakfast table for the last 30 years and you feel like there's nothing else to talk about with them, but you're appreciating them, you're there present with them in this way, right? And so on. Being in the present moment has a sort of miraculous healing or powerful effect to it often in the writings of these authors. So they really feel that if we would just be here now, to use Ram Dass's famous phrase, that we would all be better off and that this would have positive effects on society. And the way to be here now is through mindfulness practices. That's what they have decided. Okay, it's 1:15. I should check in. Do we have the photographer yet? We don't? Okay, so then, in that case, I think we can pause and take some questions, right? Okay, all right, so here we go. Question period. Some monks apparently want to be mindless, according to the cartoon. But I wonder what comments might we have thus far about this material? Yeah.
In regard to what you were just saying about being mindful of the present,
Yes.
when you were saying the 4 components of sati, the term
Yep.
that has been translated as mindfulness, one of those was remembrance.
Yes, that's right.
How does that, how do you explain that in terms of your not wanting to think about the past and so forth?
That's a very excellent observation, and what you put your finger on is potentially a problem in the mindfulness movement. There has been a sense whereby this term mindfulness, which is a translation of the term sati that we talked about on Monday, that that mindfulness as it's come to be understood has been understood with only some of its important meanings retained. And some of the important meanings of this term for mindfulness have been forgotten or lost, or even actively suppressed in this Americanization process that I've laid out over the last couple of days. Because had sati been translated as remembrance, and the idea is that you're remembering what's going on, even now, like, well, I'm remembering to come back to the present. I'm remembering to follow my breath. I'm remembering to note it coming in, going out. I'm remembering to note the raisin as I chew it, this sort of thing. That would have a really different feel to it, right? And that might keep that sense of memory or remembrance really clearly in view, and so you wouldn't lose that meaning. On the other hand, then you might lose other senses of what this is about. Because if you're talking about, remembering to bring your breath back, well, what if you're already with it, So that's not necessarily perfect either. The thing is, sati, is able to have both of these meanings because it's a different sort of word, right? But we're choosing to use an English word, and then it causes us to maybe lose some possibilities. So another thing to think about here is that the mindfulness which is being promulgated, if it is only defined as present moment awareness without judgment, which is a common way in which it's defined, that is not corresponding precisely to what traditional Buddhist mindfulness is. This is a different mindfulness. It's a shrunken mindfulness, comparatively, right? Because it's retained some aspects, but it's also lost some aspects of what was going on in a fuller mindfulness. Now, you could then possibly say, well, it may be pared down, but it's good enough. In fact, it's the essence of it, and it's what's important, and what's been lost wasn't important, in this way. So you can argue and counter-argue in this way, but certainly we can note that potentially something has been lost, this memory aspect of it. When we talk about the way in which mindfulness is used in the Pure Land tradition, which is something we'll talk about tomorrow, that memory aspect will come right up to the forefront, actually. And that's one way in which mindfulness in the Pure Land tradition differs from how mindfulness has come to be employed in this other sort of mindfulness movement in America. Okay, that was not a quick answer, but it was a very good question. Thank you. Are we? Okay, so now I believe we'll have to pause. Probably we'll have some time after the break for some questions then, or maybe we'll jump into some material and just have a longer Q&A at the end of the night. We'll just see how it goes. But at this time, I think we're going to pause and get directed by Dexter as to what we should be doing for the next few minutes.
Yeah, probably Jamie. And Jamie said, if you have to go to the bathroom before the picture, go now.
Okay, so listen to Jamie, the power behind the
But
crowd.
otherwise, yeah, then we'll get organized over here.
Just keep that there. Okay, I think we're about settling back down again. Thank you. So we kind of cut short our Q&A session. I think what I'll do, since we had a fairly sizable break, I think I'll go on with some of the material, but I'll stop with plenty of time for maybe a longer Q&A at the end of the second period than I've done the last couple nights. So why don't I just go ahead and move on. So we're talking about the solution to mindless America. The solution, of course, is going to be America plus mindfulness will equal lots of good things. So who are some of the authors? What are the things that they are suggesting? What are their programs of action? A really good example is Congressman Tim Ryan, congressman from Ohio. So he's written a book called A Mindful Nation. Actually, it's kind of dark here. I hope you can read it. The book is called A Mindful Nation, How a Simple Practice, Mindfulness, can help us reduce stress, improve performance, and recapture the American spirit. Right? So this is a really common thing that these mindfulness authors do. They start with like a very sort of selfish or personal application of it, and then they kind of lead you into it, and then they spring on you that's gonna have a bigger effect too. So so it says reduce stress. That's like just yourself and your own stress or anything. Improve performance. Woohoo! Who doesn't want to improve their performance? Oh, and it's going to recapture the American spirit. That's a bigger sort of goal there, isn't it? Right? And he's Congressman Tim Ryan, forward by John Kabat-Zinn. So you can see the connections here. So this is really significant for a number of reasons. First of all, he's a congressman. So a monk. It's not even like a meditation instructor or something like this. This is a politician, who's serving at the federal level and is trying to advocate for a mindful nation. This is his manifesto that he's published, whereby he is introducing the practice of mindfulness to his readers, trying to teach them how they can be mindful, and trying to suggest that if they're mindful, it's going to have many positive effects, not just in their own lives, but in their communities and in the nation as a whole. We can recapture the American spirit. Apparently, we've lost the American spirit, but we can recapture it through this mindfulness practice. He's another good example of the diversity of this phenomenon, because Representative Ryan is a Catholic. He is not a Buddhist. So his background is not Buddhist, and he is today, despite being a prominent mindfulness advocate, he is still not a Buddhist. What he is he is a non-Buddhist American who's gone on Buddhist-derived mindfulness meditation retreats, been personally benefited, like actually very deeply impacted by this practice, and now wants to spread it to other people. Not being Buddhist, he doesn't spread it in a Buddhist manner. In fact, being a politician, he spreads it in this particular manner. It talks about the American spirit and help American workers, and it'll help us be a great nation and this sort of thing. So this book came out a few years ago, but it's really telling to me that can we remember the slide? Meditation not just for, what was it? Hippies, weirdos, Buddhists, and foreigners. These were the four apparently disfavored or at least marginal categories that, okay? So it's not just for them, he's proving it, but it also suggests it used to be just for them. There was certainly a time in this nation's history where if a politician said, I'm writing a book about how Buddhist-derived mindfulness. He's not, he's aware where it comes from. He just isn't Buddhist himself. He says, Buddhist-type meditation is what we need to put America on the right track. Like, there certainly was a time in this country's history not that long ago where this would have had, let's say, serious political consequences for him, right? It would have been quite a strange move. But we've reached a point where it's so mainstream because of these processes it's been subjected to that he can go, there's no political blowback whatsoever. In fact, many people admire him for taking a stand and trying to suggest practical techniques whereby we might be able to solve some of the problems that we face as individuals and as a nation. Here's another good example of it. So one of the early Google engineers, a very prominent person at Google, just very recently retired from Google, actually. Chien-Ming Tan, he usually goes by Ming. He's written this best-selling book, Search Inside Yourself. Again, the unexpected path to achieving success, happiness, and world peace. They always kind of sneak it in there on you at the last minute. You thought, I was here for success and happiness, improving my performance, reducing my stress, and recapturing the American spirit and gaining world peace and everything. So there is a larger agenda here, but their way of hooking you is first by hooking you with the personal benefits, and then they hope that this will lead you on to note how this can have a larger, Congressman Tim Ryan is trying to save America. Ming's trying to save the world, basically, here, right? He's talking about world peace, not just, peace for America or peace for you or something like this. So he's become quite a big celebrity, and he's able to influence people, powerful people, important people. I live in Canada, so I'm not sure who's photobombing him in this picture, but clearly he has connections to, other people, I guess. Right? So it just goes to show you that this mindfulness is not marginal. It is rubbing shoulders literally with the highest echelons of power in this country. So that I'm not saying that this gentleman goes home and actually practices mindfulness, but he got a tour at Google from their top mindfulness guru, showed him all around and surely talked about it. Meanwhile, other people over in Congress are actually doing mindfulness and even actually leading or helping to organize mindfulness retreats for members of Congress with the hope that a mindful Congress will then be a better functioning one and pass better legislation and not be so deadlocked. Obviously, results are still pending on that one, but they're certainly working on it, right? So what's the basic theory that we see here in a book such as Search Inside Yourself? And Search Inside Yourself, we should say the evolution of this is that first Ming had the idea that mindfulness was great. He is a Buddhist, and he does mindfulness Buddhist practices. He's personally benefited from them, and he felt that other people were suffering, and they might be benefited. Their suffering might be reduced if they were introduced to mindfulness. And so he thought that what he would do is introduce it into his corporate culture. Because even though Google is sort of famous for having like rock climbing walls and coffee bars and letting people come to work in their shorts and all these sort of benefits at work, the truth of the matter is it's really quite stressful to work in the tech industry, right? So he thought that they could really benefit by having mindfulness training at Google. And so they created internally within Google training seminars for employees. So this is not in a Buddhist setting. This is inside of a corporate setting, right? And then because it was very successful, he developed a sort of franchise model whereby he could take this program. It's called Search Inside Yourself. Kind of the Google connections are very obvious with this title, right? And he could take it around the world and teach it to others. Eventually he wrote a book, about all this and helped to introduce it to even the widest possible audience. This book was on the bestseller list for quite a long time. So the idea is that if you're mindful, your stress will go down, your performance will go up, you'll be more successful, you'll be happier. And as you are more mindful, you can teach others to be more mindful too. And so that person over there will be more mindful. And then that person will be more mindful. Now there's 6 of you. Now there's 12 of you. Now there's a bunch of you. now everybody's being mindful, and so they're all making better choices. They're all consuming in a more conscious, responsible way. They're all driving in a better way. They're all eating in a better way. They're all doing their sports. They're doing the work. Everything is being done mindfully, so everything's being done better. And also in a more sort of aware and considerate of each other manner, because you're open to the present moment with other people and everything. And as this happens, just bit by bit by bit, society will get better. Eventually the world will get better, because if just everybody is mindful, or just enough people are mindful, this will just automatically cause sort of the large-scale systems that we live in, they'll become mindful too, because there's all these mindful people operating in them. And so you can change the world one mindful moment at a time. That's kind of the prescription that we see in this work and in a lot of the work that is going on inside of the mindfulness movement. So here's some examples of that mindfulness that began in the corporate environment, and then especially at Google, and then has spread. So you have the mindful work movement, then becomes mindful corporations and mindful employees. So you have, on the one hand, you have, this is just the tiniest tip of the iceberg in terms of businesses that are actively employing mindfulness these days. But you have businesses now promoting mindfulness. Aetna, for example, is a major promoter these days of mindfulness. They pay for all sorts of ads suggesting mindfulness. They host mindfulness training seminars and this sort of thing, not just for their employees, but for others in this way. So it's this big sort of thing. And it kind of makes sense in a way, because, you know, Aetna is a life insurance company. And so if everybody gets healthier, they're not going to have to pay out as much, right? So you can see this kind of an economic motive. And at the same time, people may be genuinely interested in having a healthier society just because that's good, right? And you have all these other places, Google, obviously, Aetna. It's not on here, but I told, who was that? I told Jim. I'm not sure he's here tonight. But Kaiser Permanente is another one that does mindfulness training. They also, a lot of these corporations are doing it internally so that all their employees go through the process. And this is always couched in terms of this will reduce people's stress and it will help them out and make them happier. But also there's a lot of management studies that have gone on that suggest that workers that have been trained in mindfulness are more efficient, they're more productive, and they complain less and this sort of thing. So there's management reasons to try to employ this sort of mindfulness stuff as well. But the idea is that if all these corporations become mindful because they're all being operated by mindful people, then the big corporations will go from being possibly, you know, amoral or even dangerous in some ways to then there'll be a force for good, a force for mindfulness and goodness in the world. One mindful employee at a time. Okay, schools. This is another major part of the equation. I know somebody was asking about schools maybe yesterday, the day before, and I said I would get to this, right? So maybe one of the very biggest phenomena in the whole mindfulness movement is the attempt to bring mindfulness into education. Mindfulness in the schools. There's a bunch of different organizations working on this. One prime example is Mind Up, created by actress Goldie Hawn in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. She was very upset, as many Americans were. She wondered what she could do to try to improve America and help America get back on its feet in a healthier way after this very devastating event. And so she decided that if only we could teach all children in the schools to be mindful, then our society would become mindful, and then we would operate better as a country. Not to mention, all those kids would be benefited by this in obvious ways, in her opinion. So she has funded this Mind Up program, and this is sort of quintessential de-Buddhified mindfulness, right? These are Buddhist-derived mindfulness techniques, very clearly so, but they're presented as being secular and scientifically verified. Therefore, they are safe and reliable for use with children, and they're appropriate for insertion into the public schools where, as we know, religion has been banned, right? So if this were presented as Buddhist mindfulness, then the feeling is they would not be allowed into the schools, and therefore the children would lose out on the benefits of it. So if you just don't call it Buddhist, if you just call it mindfulness, and you say it's science, and you don't talk about its religious connections in this way, then it becomes available. You can bring it into schools, and lots of schools are, in fact, incorporating elements of mindfulness training for their children, and in some cases for their teachers and administrators as well. The idea being that this will help kids with their attention problems. Of course, attention problems are one of the main things that teachers complain about these days. If we're really living in this hyper-distracted, hyperactive environment, as people are suggesting, kids have some of the worst of this, right? And they're all using devices. People talk about being born digital these days. So, a 2-year-old knows how to use an iPhone at this point. So that may have serious consequences actually on their brain formation, on the formation of their attention span and their personality and everything. So if you can deliver to them a process whereby they can learn to pay attention. They might have been able to pay attention somewhat naturally in the past as a more natural skill. Now it has to be a learned, acquired skill. So if you can teach it to them through these sort of practices, then maybe they'll be able to do better at school. They'll get higher grades. They'll learn more. They'll have less discipline problems. I think that's a lot of what's going on, frankly, when the schools are pushing this. They just, want to cut down on having to discipline kids all the time. And so if the kids are quiet and calm and attentive and in their seats instead of running around, you can see the obvious benefit that they feel they're going to get out of this sort of effect. So mindfulness in the schools. What you have here then is kids being taught to do Buddhist-derived meditation practices without a Buddhist connection. And then the idea is hopefully they'll just go on and continue to do it. It's really so different from the way mindfulness used to be taught in a very sort of controlled, specific environment in the monastery. So to a certain degree, we're kind of running a giant social experiment on our kids with this as well. I kind of have to point out. Maybe it'll go well, maybe it won't. We'll find out. There have been people who have objected to this, that there are religious connections to mindfulness, even if you're not talking about them. And so there have been actually lawsuits against public schools that have instituted mindfulness programs, alleging that they're infringing on the beliefs, be they Christian or be they sort of secular, of the parents and therefore of the children, and that this is an inappropriate sort of activity. And some school districts have dropped mindfulness programs under criticism from concerned parents. But that said, the number dropping is vastly outpaced by the number who are now newly adopting these sort of practices. This is a very big trend. So if only the kids can get mindful, then they'll grow up to be mindful adults. Mindful prisons. I think this was another thing that somebody was asking about. So this is a interesting development. Here we see a Vipassana meditation retreat happening in a high security Alabama prison. So there's a whole film about this actually called The Dhamma Brothers. I recommend it if you're able to find it. There's been a number of places in the US where they've tried these experiments of holding mindfulness meditation retreats for prisoners. These are like, traditional 10-day type retreats where they are segregated from the rest of the prison population, and they have to sit in silence, and they're taught to be mindful. They have to take sort of precept vows during this time period, and they are basically acting like Buddhist monks in this sort of situation. And some of the prisoners have questions about that, of course, because they fear that it could interfere with their religious beliefs. But those who have enrolled in these programs have often reported that it was very beneficial for them, that it helped them to learn much more about themselves. It might have been the first time ever anybody had taught them to pay attention to how their mind works and then actually discover something about themselves that they never had any access to. And of course, you can imagine how prisons may be reluctant at first because it seems strange. But on the other hand, if this causes prisoner misbehavior to go down, then they might really go in for this sort of thing. So there's potentially benefits both for the administration and for the prisoners. So if we can get mindful prisoners, maybe they also won't recommit crimes once they get out. On the other side of the equation, mindful police. So there are efforts to teach mindfulness to the police. I kind of put a few more things on here. Since police-community relations are, let us say, a highly sensitive topic at this moment in America, I thought this one merited a bit more sort of discussion. Here we have an example of a mindful police officer. He's sort of promoting mindfulness while wearing his uniform, so showing how being a police officer, he can be benefited by mindfulness. What are the things that people like this tend to suggest? How would mindfulness help a police officer? Other than the regular things, a police officer is a person, so he might lower his stress or might help her blood pressure or something like that, and like all the ways it helps anybody else. But there's specific ways in which it might help officers do their job is suggested. First of all, if they're mindful, they can learn to be less reactive. There's a lot of things at work in the recent police community conflicts we've seen, but certainly one factor of it is reactiveness on the part of some officers, reacting in a violent or in a scared or otherwise a difficult manner and escalating situations instead of de-escalating situations, right? So if they can be less reactive, this might help them to do their job better. It can help them to be better communicators, because if you're mindful of what the person is actually saying to you and actually doing, rather than projecting onto them what you're afraid they may be like, then you can communicate better with them and maybe resolve the situation in a better way. Certainly helping them to have a sharper focus, so they're more attentive, they can observe what's going on, watch the bad guys better, really see what's going on, look for clues if they're working at a crime scene, this sort of thing. Better focus will help in these ways. And of course, like I said, lower stress in general. And in particular, it's often talked about how being a police officer is often a highly stressful job. And in fact, you encounter difficult, in times violent situations. And so a high number of police officers are suffering from some degree of what might be characterized as post-traumatic stress disorder, because they have encountered difficult traumatic events, experienced traumatic events while being on the job. So police officers have a high rate of PTSD-related ailments, things like alcoholism or depression or other things that are associated with this. They have a much higher than normal rate of suicide as well, and it's connected to these sort of difficulties they face on the job. So there's suggestions that if they can be mindful before even like an event happens, then in the event when something's going on, they'll be more mindful, they'll be less traumatized by it, and coming out of it also, they'll be better equipped to deal with, in a healthy way, the effects of whatever difficult situation they've experienced. So they'll be less likely to acquire high levels of PTSD and be better able to handle this sort of thing that happens for them. So it's sort of like preparing them ahead of time for the difficulties they face. These are some of the suggestions for how mindfulness taught to police forces might be useful. I have to say that it's not been widely spread yet, either in the prisons or in the police forces. There's just kind of individual instances of where this is going on in the US. But there's a lot of people suggesting that these would be useful in both of these environments. Versus people in the schools, that's actually quite an active thing. And mindfulness in various companies and corporations is also quite an active phenomenon at this time. Okay, we can take it a step further. This is something that was being asked about yesterday. What about mindfulness in the military? There are active programs to bring mindfulness into the military. This is the sort of the largest one, mindfulness-based mind fitness training, MMFT, a branded form of training soldiers, American soldiers, in mindfulness in order to help them do their job better. You can see the sort of language that gets used. What we get out of this will help take us to that next level of being warriors. So this is Buddhist-derived meditation that's being used to improve your performance as a warrior, as a soldier, as a fighter. There's kind of two sides to this. On the one hand, a lot of this is related to that PTSD. If you think cops have it bad, American servicemen and women have some of the highest rates of suicide in the entire society. It's actually a higher, more people are dying from suicide and PTSD-related behaviors or effects than people killed in actual combat duty, right? So this is actually a higher threat to our service people, is the sort of psychological effects of being a soldier, especially in the sort of difficult environments that servicemen and women are called upon to serve in these days. People are not out on some traditional, battlefront in some way where the enemy's clear and they can, advance and this sort of thing. No, people are fighting in very murky situations. It's very unclear who's friend, who's foe. They're often in urban environments. They often have to engage in combat amongst civilian populations with combatants that it's unclear whether they are civilians or whether they are opponents in this way. And also the nature of this sort of guerrilla type warfare they're often involved in means you have to be constantly on alert, because anybody could be an enemy, any object could be an explosive. At any moment you could be attacked, and you never know where it's coming from. So you have to be hyper vigilant. Everyone around you comes to look like a potential terrorist or potential problem. Obviously, even if the attack never ever comes, serving a tour of duty and then a second tour, like with this hyper constant vigilance, this has very corrosive real effects on people's psychological state of being. That's just a natural sort of thing. So if mindfulness is something they can be trained in before they're sent abroad, sent into the field, then they'll be better equipped to handle these situations. They'll be less likely to come home damaged in these ways. This is a lot of what this is about. That said, there is another side to this, and that is people believe that their combat effectiveness will be raised by mindfulness practices. So if you are a sniper, then you will be better at shooting people if you're mindful, because you need to not be distracted. You need to be focused. You need to be prepared to shoot when the moment comes. You need to be, have your aim just right, and so on. If you are a soldier out in the field, you need to be mindful so that you can be aware of the threats and notice what's going on over there instead of failing to notice the threat as it's coming at you. And you need to be able to react better and appropriately. You need to be able to be mindful enough to maybe not react with force if it's something you can diffuse, or on the other hand, you may need to react quickly and appropriately with a heightened combat effectiveness because of your mindfulness. So there's that level of it as well. Certainly when they talk about being the next level of being a warrior, some of that is mindfulness-enhanced killing abilities. That's part of what's going on here, but it's not the entirety of it, because as I say, there's a lot more to this, including the PTSD component, and the fact that many servicemen and women are not serving in active fighting situations, but are in the community in some fashion and need to be able to interact with people in a mindful and sort of aware manner. So the idea here is mindfulness basically helps everything it comes to, and regardless of what it is, and even the possible questionable qualities of what it is, if you add mindfulness to it, it will be better than it was previously. So all these corporations like GE, Aetna, and so on, they don't really have our best interests in mind. They have their stakeholders' interests in mind, right? Their shareholders. And so, but if we can make all of those people mindful running those corporations, then those corporations will act better, do better than they would have done otherwise. In military or police situations, there's always going to be a level of violence and threat and difficulty that people are facing. But if you at least add mindfulness to it, then people will be able to react more appropriately, be able to do a better job in these sort of situations. That's the theory that people often have in the mindfulness movement. Here's a comic, just since the military stuff can be a little heavy, so we'll move to a joke afterwards. So, no, the economy isn't growing slowly, it's growing mindfully. This is sort of getting at the idea we often see in the mindfulness movement that if we were just all mindful, then we would be mindful with our consumption patterns, and this would then cause us to develop a kind of mindful capitalism. So we'd still buy stuff, we'd still sell stuff, we'd still be innovators, we'd still have jobs, still have bosses, still have workers, still have all this stuff, but it'd be a lot more mindful. So it would be not as damaging, and it might be more compassionate and so on if we added mindfulness into things. Maybe we wouldn't obsessively chase after ever higher economic growth, but instead might come to value responsible growth, or even just responsible economics. Might scale back if that made more sense, if we were more mindful and more aware in this way. So this is a common sort of sense that this could become a mindful economics, a mindful capitalism, and this would help to create a more mindful culture and world that we'd be living in. So the results would be a mindful nation. So this is Tim Ryan. This is a quote from his book, A Mindful Nation. I'm pretty sure this is the last slide full of text for today, but let's look at it. Sorry. What does he think? According to his manifesto, what's going to happen if we do add this mindfulness? Well, as we bring mindfulness into healthcare, we'll find a tool that helps us take care of ourselves better, to see the roots of many of our problems. An increase in self-care not only makes us feel better, but also costs our system less. See how they believe that there'll be benefits that flow out of these sort of things, allowing us to focus more of our resources on illnesses beyond our control. It means at present, okay? So add it to the healthcare system, and the healthcare system will be better, plus we'll save money. When we bring mindfulness into education, we help our students increase attention, decrease their stress, and work more creatively with their social emotions. And teachers find they pay better attention to the real needs of all their students and foster a better classroom attention. So bring it into the schools, and the schools will work better, the students will be better off, and the teachers will be better off. So you add it here, it improves that part of society. Add it there, it improves that part of society. When we bring mindfulness into the military, we help to enhance the greatest resource we have to ensure our own security and defense. Something more powerful than any high-tech weaponry. Well-functioning, high-performing human beings who have refined situational awareness. Okay? So bring mindfulness into the military, another place over here, and then that will be improved by the mindfulness. When we bring mindfulness into our approaches to energy, the environment, and the economy, so several big sectors here, we can find ways to live more simply while discovering a kind of prosperity that doesn't abuse our planet. So you add it here, that gets mindful. You add it here, that gets mindful. This gets mindful. You add it here, this gets mindful, and so on. So you're filling in with mindfulness everywhere, coloring the whole map with mindfulness. So the goal here is saturation mindfulness, saturation of the entire society, of all of America with mindfulness, so that eventually, everybody in the whole group, every individual is mindful, and every individual part of the society is mindful, so that all these individuals individually being mindful, and all these individual industries, the military, the school system, the healthcare system, the corporations, this sort of thing. All of these are individually mindful, so that when you step back, what you see is the totality of what has become, by default now, a mindful society. This is a basic way in which it's most often presented by somewhat sort of utopian-minded people in the mindfulness movement. You create the great, peaceful situation, everybody singing Kumbaya on the beach, wanting to buy the world of Coke together, because each individual and each individual part of the society is mindful. It all leads up to this. This is the vision, which is most frequently put forward in books like Search Inside Yourself and many of the other works that I've encountered. So there's some critiques, however, of this vision. And a lot of these critiques come from inside the mindfulness movement itself. So as I've tried to suggest over the last 4 days, the mindfulness movement is not one thing with one opinion or one approach. It's a great many different sub-movements interacting with each other. And all that they share, really, is that they are all interested in mindfulness and believe that mindfulness can be useful to individuals and potentially useful on a larger scale. But then how they characterize it, what they think you need to do about it, really differs amongst different people. Overall, there's definitely sort of the default level is to believe that if just every individual is mindful, and then just we mindfulized our industries and elements of society, that we'd all get to the perfect, loving, utopia at the end of the day. But there are other critics within the mindfulness movement who are also mindfulness teachers, also mindfulness practitioners, who push back at these interpretations and suggest that there's serious problems with this vision, or at least with elements of this vision, or in some cases with some of the ways in which the vision is being carried out at present. So what are some of the critiques? Well, actually, a couple of the prominent critics in the mindfulness movement. So again, they're not all critics of the mindfulness movement, they're critics in the mindfulness movement, trying to suggest to other people in the movement with them that there's different or better ways from their point of view to do these things. So they share practices and they largely share the same goal, but they somewhat disagree on processes to get there. They've actually coined a term they call McMindfulness. This is a term they used in a derogatory way against some of the instantiations of mindfulness we've talked about. So that's why we've got a picture of Ronald McDonald here, because of this McMindfulness idea. It's the idea that mindfulness and the way in which it's promoted has become so watered down, so denatured, so not only sort of hiding its Buddhist roots, but actively cutting them off and drifting away from them in an amoral or selfish or narcissistic manner, that there's serious deficiencies in the mindfulness that results. And it is a mindfulness which is weakened and unable to actually serve people best. They say things like it has become so individualistic that it's not able to realistically help people with their problems. If you do mindfulness, if you tell people, oh, you should do mindfulness because it'll make you look better in your swimsuit, and you should do mindfulness because it'll make you earn more money at work, and you should do mindfulness because it will make you enjoy sex better, that these are the wrong reasons to promote mindfulness. You're giving them mindful techniques. At the same moment, you're speaking to their ego. You're increasing their ego attachment in some way. And so now they're going to use a technique that could have been liberating, and instead it's actually just keeps them spinning around, in sort of the same ego orbit in some manner, is part of the critique here. So that kind of mindfulness is not going to have large-scale liberating effects, because all it does is reinforce the sense of hyper-individualism, which is a source of problems in America, according to these critics. This kind of mindfulness, one mindful moment, one mindful person at a time, the critics suggest, just reinforces the status quo. Because this is not a mindfulness revolution. It's not a rebellion. It's not a revolt. It's mindfulness that reinforces, or at least doesn't shake up, the status quo. Because on the other side of this mindfulness revolution, everything's still the same. You still have schools that kids go to for the same amount of time and probably a similar curriculum. They're just more mindful when they're there. You still have big corporations that are multinational and serve their shareholders' interests at the end of the day, that are selling us all kind of things we don't really need and using all sorts of manipulative advertising to try to take the money out of our wallets and this sort of thing. And so, yeah, add some mindfulness to it. They're still going to be like that at the end of the day. You know, maybe they'll just be actually better because now Don Draper and the people from Mad Men, they're all mindful, so they'll be even better at, you know, getting us to buy stuff we don't need. So they say this just reinforces the status quo. Yeah, okay, if you make the politicians mindful, maybe that'll help a bit, but it's still the same system, so it will run the same basic way. So these are people who suggest that what you need is social change, social revolution in some manner. They're not necessarily, you know, like Trotskyites out there looking to, you know, smash the world order and like put something else in, you know, but you need some sort of systematic actual change rather than just individuals in the system just being more mindful in cogs inside the machine is their suggestion. And until you actually start changing the things themselves, there's really not going to be much payoff. They say that this sort of vision ignores larger, more complicated social factors that are actually at play in the reasons why we have suffering in America. So the reason why cops and the community are having problems, and it's hard to say in any individual case, but I think the evidence is entirely clear that on the whole, police are killing unarmed people in situations where those people don't pose an actual threat. It's pretty clear that it's not just, oh, if only he'd been more mindful, maybe he would have, you know, checked closer to see if it was a gun. There's whole systems of racism that are in operation here, and whole systems of the weaponization of our police forces, you know. They have all sorts of riot gear and sort of military-grade hardware that has just recently been sold to them, basically since 9/11, for like counterinsurgency situations, right? And then if you deploy them in the streets wearing this kind of stuff, what do you think is going to happen, right? So this is, you know, there's whole things that are going on here that just because, you know, if you're a little more mindful while you're wearing like your total body armor, carrying your assault weapon, and facing a person in a system where you've been taught that white people are the most valuable and other people are less valuable and some people are very devalued, just because you can follow your breath does not mean that you're going to do any better in this situation. Like racism needs to actually be systematically uprooted through processes of not just breathing, but like, you know, all sorts of other changes have to go into the system. These are the critiques that people have of this sort of thing. So they say, it's not bad that you're teaching mindfulness to the police forces, but get real. It's going to take a lot more than just mindful breathing for us to actually solve these very real situations we have. These are the critiques that some people have. And then we have the critique about the religious nature of meditation. That although that we've stopped calling it Buddhism and stopped admitting that it has a religious connection, it comes right out of religion. Many of these people got trained in religious contexts, even though they now teach it in non-religious contexts. And it is potentially infringing on people's religious freedoms in some ways. So people are, like I said, suing to get it taken out of the schools at times. This is an interesting one to think about. On the one hand, it's hard to see how much harm can be caused to someone if they learn a bit of, sort of basic meditation. And you could even say, like, if your faith is so weak that, like, learning to follow your breath caused you to stop being a Christian or something, you were a pretty weak Christian to start with, right? So there's you got to kind of think this through. But on the other hand, if you kind of change the script, you say, well, yes, it's true that mindfulness meditation has apparently been demonstrated to lower stress and to have good health benefits, but also prayer, like Christian-type petitionary prayer, has allegedly been shown in scientific studies to have healthful effects. So maybe we should have people praying at their desk, because this would also lower their blood pressure and also increase their health and this sort of thing, right? So, and maybe we won't make them Christian prayers. We'll just leave out the word God. We'll say the Lord's Prayer, but we just won't say the word Lord or something, because that's basically the same. It's like mindfulness meditation is just Buddhism, but just not using the Buddhist keywords, right? So we'll just use, we'll use Christian prayers, but we'll just take out the allegedly Christian content, but they'll still basically be Christian prayers. They come from a certain environment. They carry the kind of karma of where they're from. They have a certain structure and tone and everything to them. So, when we put it that way, maybe it does seem like more of a question. I'm not trying to suggest that people are wrong to promote mindfulness in all these instances, or that they're right to promote it in any one of them. Rather, I'm just trying to depict the fact that people are bringing it in with these ideas, and other people are pushing back with other interpretations of what might be going on. Now, because I have a few more minutes, Dexter was actually asking me to say something about mindfulness and capitalism, because, and I think this fits in here, because a lot of the idea is that we will develop a mindful capitalism by bringing mindfulness into the market, that it will change the market, change how we do business, change how we sell things, because there's something inherently good about mindfulness and something inherently wonderful about people living in the present moment. Certainly many people suggest in a not terribly reflective way that just bring mindfulness out into the marketplace, and it will change the marketplace and everything will go well. This is certainly a possibility. But another possibility is that, as we've been talking about all week, social forces that already exist in America are so strong that when Buddhism meets them, the Buddhism so often gets changed by them. Changes aren't necessarily bad, but they certainly are changes, right? So, for example, the medical establishment is such a big thing that when Buddhism meets it, then the meditation ends up going into the hospitals, but at the same time, the Buddhism gets left back in the past, and so only certain parts get through, right? Well, surely capitalism is one of the strongest social forces operating in contemporary American society. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And so, what might happen? Let's use that for what I think will be our final topic for tonight. So mindful products. This is part of the idea, is that if we sold all sorts of products that were mindful, and if people had mindful products to choose from, those mindful products would be better for them than the not mindful ones. And so this is another way in which, again, we're coloring in every part of the picture with mindfulness so that the whole picture eventually will be mindful. This magazine Mindful, I brought it up several times because it's just such a perfect example of the forces that I see going on. It's also one of the primary promoters to the general public of mindfulness. But honestly, the things that I see in this magazine, I see them also going on in many other places as well. So it just happens to be a good regular sort of case study to go to. So here's Mindful magazine, and this magazine is full of mindful products. Why are they mindful products? By definition, they are because they're in a magazine called Mindful, right? So I'm totally serious, actually, with that comment, that they're associating themselves with mindfulness by advertising in here. That's an overt practice that is occurring, right? About 1/3 of the content of this magazine is ads for products. Many of those products are themselves mindfulness in some fashion. Okay, you can't actually sell mindfulness. You can't get a jar of mindfulness and drink it before the expiration date. Put it back in the fridge and this sort of thing, right? But you can sell mindfulness training, right? So there's a lot of that going on, and you can sell products that will supposedly help you get mindful, or you could sell products that maybe somehow you try to associate with mindfulness in some other way. Like I say, approximately 1/3 of this magazine is ads. That's after you've already paid these several dollars for the cover charge just to get it, and then you're buying yourself 33 cents of every dollar you're spending on it is an ad that you're buying, right? But there's nothing unusual about mindful in that way. But this is a normal model in the publishing industry, which I myself worked in. So what do we find when we look inside? So Mindful in the back has something that they call, literally, it's called the marketplace. It's the Mindful marketplace. And these are some of the ads that they have in there. I'm sorry, you can't see them real well on this screen, so I've given you a few pointers to help you out with it. Here's some of the products that they're selling that they're suggesting are mindful. So what do we have? Yeah, it happens to be at the front, my favorite. The Mindful Sexuality Couples Retreats, starting at $1,054 and going up from there, right? Okay, so go off on this retreat with your spouse, and there's a couple of mindful sex instructors, and yeah, I think that this is the kind of thing that, like, if Kermit the Frog is going on this retreat, he says, "Oh, I'm going on a mindfulness retreat." He doesn't give Miss Piggy the details, right? Then we have Mindfulicious is the brand name, granola bars. Mindfulicious, $9 for granola bars. How are these granola bars mindful? I'm just going to say this right now. I'm not making anything up that I will say in the next 5 minutes about anything at all on this slide. The way in which this candy bar essentially is mindful is because on the wrapper says, "Be mindful." It's got instructions on there. It says, like, pause, be aware, eat me mindfully, basically. Really, the wrapper has these things, and that's what makes this a mindfulicious granola bar versus something from, I suddenly can't think of any, what's that? Cliff Bar. Yeah, versus a Cliff Bar. Even a Cliff Bar tries to get in on it, though, because, like just whatever, frankly, crap that I put in my kids' lunches every day, just the basic granola bars, those don't have mindfulness instructions on the label, so therefore they're cheaper. So the funny thing is, you can sell a granola bar for, at $9 because it's mindful. By adding mindfulness to it in some way, you increase its value, and so you increase its saleability and its selling price. We have Naropa University, a Buddhist-based university. So you can go there, get a mindful education at $30,000 plus for undergrad, $22.5 for graduate school. We have benches. So sit on this bench and be mindful. It costs a lot of money, actually, but at least it's supporting your meditation, right? So it should be pretty good. And then this one here, okay, so these are just scents, aromas. I mean, they're just smells, right? But you call it mindful, and you create ad copy that suggests that when you spray it on yourself, it has a refreshing, reviving effect on your mind. So it's refreshing you. You're becoming mindful in this way. So you'll pay $30 for what I take to be kind of like scented water or something like that. So these are just a slice of the kind of mindful products. So when mindfulness meets the marketplace, perhaps the marketplace becomes mindful, but certainly mindfulness turns into a commercial commodity. That is absolutely something that happens here. And then we can give you sort of a further example of this to kind of analyze something specific. So this is an ad for Buddha Girl jewelry. It's a real thing. So this is, in fact, the inside front cover and first real page of an issue of Mindful magazine. So as I keep pointing out, there's a tendency to hide the mindfulness or hide the Buddhism. Like, look here at the cover. Where is the Buddhism? Nowhere. She's sitting down again. But if you guys are all sitting down. Of course, half of you Buddhists, so that doesn't help. But this is. But just sitting down doesn't make you a Buddhist. On the other hand, if you are a Buddhist, seeing somebody sitting, it has a kind of an echo. It has a callback. So there's a secret code that's kind of going on here. But for the general public, where's the Buddhism? Nowhere. Ariana Huffington on the new metric for success. The new metric is being mindfulness. Spoiler, right? The teenage brain, not as scary as you think. I love some of these things here, right? So where's the mindfulness? Nowhere. Mirror neurons up there. So it's science, this sort of stuff. There's no presence, overt presence of Buddhism. There's no Buddhism out front. The face is not Buddhist anymore. And also, not for nothing, the face is usually white. But when we open to the back cover, so on the back side, not actually of that issue, but of another issue, which also just had a guy sitting on the floor, right? We find some Buddhism again. We've got Buddha girl. There's Buddha in the name. So this is jewelry. Here's some of the jewelry. Here's some of it. Here it is down here and everything. And how is this jewelry being sold? Well, this jewelry has a cutesy name, Buddha Girl. Their tagline is Mindful Glamour. That's their motto, Mindful Glamour, right? Mindful Glamour. So you're associating mindfulness with your jewelry and glamour with your jewelry, okay? You've got a Buddha statue sitting here in the palm of the person wearing it, so you're associating Buddhism and all this sort of stuff. This says turning routines into rituals. So kind of like a Buddhist mindfulness ritual. And let's see if I can actually read this on here. A day begins. Buddha Girl is a story of awareness and new beginnings. I can't read the rest of it. It's all fuzzy. But what I can tell you is on their website and in some of their ads, they talk about how this is mindful jewelry because when you put it on in the morning, it reminds you that you're putting it on. You're in the moment as you're wearing your jewelry. And so it is mindful and therefore has all of the health effects of mindfulness and can save the world, right? Because you put on this jewelry and not some other stupid mindless jewelry, which you just put on and forget about. You put on Buddha Girl jewelry. This is actually what they're essentially saying with their ad copy. I'm not misrepresenting this. You can go right to buddhagirl.com and you will see that this is truly the way it is, right? So in this situation, a product, which I think we can agree, this is not actually mindful in any real way, substantively, versus any other bangle or whatever you might wear, right? But if you call it mindful glamour, you call it Buddha Girl, you associate it with mindfulness and Buddhism and things like this, you're able to sell your product. There's a lot of other people trying to sell jewelry, a lot of people. So you've got to stand out in some way. That's the inherent effect of the market. You must find a way to inspire customers and customer loyalty. So let's look at some of the prices of these things. What is the price of mindful glamour? The price is, as we can see, not inexpensive. So here I just got basic prices for a lot of these things. This is obviously actually from a year or two ago when I was actually doing this research. They may have moved on with the prices since then, but it's basically right. Okay, that's a price for the bangle, not for the Buddha there. And then, now that we've sort of uncovered the prices, another thing is there are no prices in the ad, which is a very interesting thing, isn't it, right? So they're just giving you the story up front. The payment comes later. So let's look at this here. So what is let's just look at the mechanics here. This is the last of these slides, don't worry. The cost of this ad was approximately $6,645. That's my estimate based on the size of the ad inside of it, based on the ad rates that they had at the same year. Of course, it's possible that they got some sort of special deal for this particular ad, but generally speaking, a 2-page ad on the inside cover would have a price of about that much. So they spend $6,645 to have this ad posted. The average cost of their merchandise is $136 per unit. That's not what any single bangle costs. It's like, just if you add them all up, that's about the cost of a rationalized unit of mindful of Buddha girl jewelry, right? So you would have to sell 49 units in order to recoup it, because 49 times 136 is approximately 6,645. I hope I'm in religious studies, not in the math faculty. Hopefully those numbers are right. So if you need to sell 49, let's note that Mindful has a readership of 210,000 people currently. That means that if you sell 1 unit of your Mindful Glamour to other people, 1 unit out of every 4,286 readers, you will break even for the price of that ad. So almost 1 out of every 4,300 people, and you'll have covered your cost, right? If 1 in every 1,000 readers buys just one of these items, you'll have a revenue of $28,560. Taking out the cost of the ad, this is an approximate profit of $21,915. Pretty good. Now, obviously, actually, there are other expenses. There's the actual materials you had to invest in and so on. But, generally speaking, we can just take this as a rough estimate of how it would go. So does 1 in every 1,000 readers buy this sort of thing? Well, actually, according to the mindfulness, to their own media kit, 25% of their readers buy advertised products out of the issue. So that doesn't mean that 25% are buying Buddha girl jewelry, but potentially they are. 25% of 210,000 people, there is serious money to be made, potentially, by associating your jewelry with mindfulness, with Buddhism, because associate with mindfulness associates it potentially with Buddhism, especially if you call it Buddha girl and you put a Buddha in the palm of your model, right? The question then becomes, why would you not do this? If mindfulness can come into the market and help you to market your products, everybody else is hustling, trying to get the customers' dollars. What possible incentive could be strong enough to keep you from doing this sort of thing? So, just to respond to sort of Dexter's question in the cart today, what happens when we have mindfulness and capitalism? One thing is that capitalism causes people to use mindfulness in order to sell their products in this sort of way. And there's not strong disincentives to operate in any other way. And so, finally, what we discover is an entire universe of mindful related through advertising products appears, and mindfulness is now free and loose in the marketplace. So we have mindful mints, mindful mayo, one of my favorites, mindful meals, mindful snacks, mindful minerals. In what way is mayonnaise actually mindful, right? It's, I'm pretty sure, not a sentient being, but anyways. Mindful supply, mindful power, and mindful mayo used to be my favorite, but now, today, my favorite is mindful marijuana. Mindful is it's an actual brand, Colorado, if I remember correctly, and so, on one hand, in some ways, jewelry would be opposite of the original source of mindfulness, which was amongst monks who have renounced all of their possessions and are trying to transcend the world and its appearances, and jewelry is like the opposite of that in some way. But I guess the marijuana is probably even more opposite, because this is a drug which has many possible positive effects, from pain maintenance to the munchies or whatever, right? There's many ways in which you could be benefited by it. But I think we can probably agree that one thing marijuana does not do is make you mindful. It makes your mind fuzzier, it scatters it, and these are opposites, right? But because it's become so denatured, this idea of mindfulness, you can use it to sell even something which will actively decrease your level of mindfulness, right? So that's where we end up, to answer your question. All right, there we go. Questions and discussion. Ooh, actually, we're about out of time. We better just give it just a few minutes, but maybe if people have questions or reactions, and then we'll let you go home.
I'm curious about any research that is out there about the mindfulness meditation practice, the quality of it and involvement in it as it relates to your mindfulness behavior. Yeah. Has there been any kind of research in terms of the quality of the instruction, your participation in the meditation, how much you're involved?
So there's a lot of different sorts of studies out there. Really an amazing amount of research has been conducted or is being conducted. A lot of it is specifically related to possible medical effects of mindfulness. Does mindfulness decrease stress? In what way and under what conditions and these sort of things? Or does mindfulness help with these stress-related illnesses in what ways and this sort of thing, right? That's kind of maybe like the largest single chunk of it. But it does spread into other things too. So there are often smaller scale studies that are looking at maybe, if you bring mindfulness into this or that profession, do the employees seem to be benefited? Does the company seem to actually operate more efficiently, or do those employees seem to perform their jobs better? If you bring mindfulness into the schools, do test scores seem to go up? Are there fewer reports of misbehavior, people going to the nurse, or because of accidents or this sort of thing? Like, absolutely, there's a lot of research on a lot of these sort of phenomena going on. So is it the quality of the meditation practice, which is related to maybe the change in behavior? Has that been proven? Is that kind of what you're looking for? So there are suggestions that there are, but there's really differing opinions about the science. There are a lot of people who are completely convinced by the science that we have now, that these things all work and they work good. And there's a fair number of people who are somewhat skeptical of a lot of these studies and feel that they're poorly designed or that more work is done. There's also sort of the effect of a lot of the scientists themselves often are cautious and responsible in how they report their findings, but then other people read their reports and then start magnifying the alleged effects of what's going on here. So this is a common thing that we see when sort of lay people get a hold of science reports in this way. So it's not entirely clear how much benefit is being derived and what exactly is the benefit in many cases. But there are some suggestions that in some cases there may be a placebo effect that goes on, that anytime to do a mindfulness exercise in a clinical setting, you've got to put the cell phone away. You've got to concentrate on just the one task, say the task of breathing. And so sometimes when they get their control group, which also has to put their machine away, and then is told to just sit around, not do much, well, often their stress goes down too, because they're not doing anything stressful. So then it kind of raises this question: was it really the mindfulness, or was it the not all the otherness that is actually the effect here? And the problem is that in many cases, people are not taught to develop a deep level of mindfulness. It's a fairly superficial mindfulness that's being just tossed about in the popular culture, and so it's hard to detect whether there's anything deeper or longer lasting that's going on there. Also on things like the mindful schools, it's hard to say what's going on because maybe it helps a bit, but you'd have to run it for like a generation to see whether this stuff really sticks. And so in some ways we're still early in the game, so it's, the results are still out. We don't know what it will be. But some people think that there's pretty convincing evidence that the quality of the meditation does help to bring about substantial beneficial effects.
Has there been, work to see if 10 minutes versus 1 hour versus a 10-day retreat, affects the outcome?
Yeah, I think there has been. Certainly what I can say is that people have studied it at all these different levels, and surely somebody has looked to try to, just match these up. But I can't personally just right now recall anything like this. What I do know is, oh, what's the problem? Okay, all right. Sorry, something's happening off stage. So the tendency is for ever decreasing amounts. So we went from like a lifetime in the monastery to like 10-day intensive retreats to like intensive days to like doing it for an afternoon to like now they're selling books 5-minute mindfulness, but now they're selling 1-minute mindfulness books. Seriously, this is America. This is what happens. And not only instant gratification culture, but also the market demands if you can ever decrease the amount so that people feel it's easier and easier, they're more likely to buy it in this way. So there's a market pressure which causes you to decrease the amount of quality time put into mindfulness or mindfulness training. Okay, it's just about 9.
We're getting the signal that that we need to end.
We need to end. Okay. All right. So sorry, I ended up talking quite a lot. We did not have as much chance for discussion tonight. I will leave plenty of time tomorrow and might even keep that promise. So hopefully we'll have some good discussion tomorrow. And we'll talk a bit more about mindfulness in Buddhism and maybe what more traditional Buddhism might learn from what's going on with the mindfulness movement, and maybe vice versa. Maybe there's things in Buddhism that the very secularized mindfulness movement might benefit from bringing a bit more of that back on board. So anyways, that'll be our final session for tomorrow. Thank you all very much, and have a good evening.